acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and offer a really warm welcome to all of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friends here with us today, and a big warm welcome to members of the association and guests. I start many of my presentations by talking about people and talking about trust. And it seems that no matter where I turn, this is at the very heart and the core of RegTech. Today's session was conceived after my exposure to the very rich universe of RegTech members that we have, who are actively looking to deploy their solutions that encourage greater financial inclusion, and also most recently had an enlightening discussion with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who it might surprise you to know are exploring RegTech as a means to create pathways to easier and safer access to digital financial services to some of the poorest people in the world. I've recently also had an opportunity to meet with the World Economic Forum, and for those of you that don't know WEF, they're a non-profit that was founded in Geneva back in the 70s, and they really bring together leaders from the political spectrum, cultural spectrums, business spectrums to share global ideas and agendas. And they too have a project that is aiming to help and foster full access to and use of affordable financial services to the underserved. And from our own perspective, we recently undertook a collaboration with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for an APEC project. And so for those of you that aren't familiar, there are 21 economies that comprise APEC. And financial inclusion was a key part of that project. And we made some recommendations to the economies on how they may approach inclusion in a post-pandemic world. And one of my colleagues will put a link to that report. It's only quite a short report to read. We'll put a link to that report in the chat. You know, RegTech solutions can really address key challenges to financial inclusion, facing both mainstream and alternative financial services. It includes things like reducing the time for client onboarding, verifying identity, proof of income, conduct and culture, financial wellness, and other data analytics that help facilitate collaboration and communication, and much, much more besides being limited to just those things. And it's my great pleasure to have a range of RegTechs with us today who are going to present on how they are supporting financial inclusion. And I'd also point out that today is just the start of this conversation. In April, we'll be running our global Accelerate RegTech 2022 event, and financial inclusion will be a significant topic on that agenda. So if you haven't already registered for that, you can do so now. It's live online. The other thing I just wanted to say before I introduce the first speaker is today we have more than 190 registrations. They are comprising of 30 regulated institutions, 15 regulators, 4 investors, and the lion's share were actually RegTech firms themselves, and they are representing 20 countries. So I would say to those online and those presenting today we have a truly global audience, so please maximise the potential opportunity that you will have today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. As I said, we prefer if you can keep your mic and your camera off until you're invited to the stage. We are going to do all questions for all of the speakers in the Q&A chat function. So please feel free to use that, and the team will be posting little messages in there so you know what to do. We will be recording the session today, and you will receive an email of this upon conclusion. And at 2 different parts today, there will be a little poll that pops up. We'd encourage you to complete that. One is about how you found the event today, which is really important feedback for us. And the other one is some data that we are collecting for Austrade. And if you are a RegTech looking to scale and grow beyond Australia's borders, if you could indicate on that little poll, it's all anonymous, that'd be awesome. And we're feeding back those insights to Austrade so they have some idea about where they need to be focusing their efforts. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our first speaker, who is Dima Kachilov from EY. Dima and Nick have worked with us very hard on this agenda, and we're delighted that they're here today. They're going to give us a bit of an overview. And just one last reminder, please, everybody, if you can stay to your time, that way we'll get some time at the end for a bit of networking. Thank you so much. Dima, over to you.
Thank you, Deb, and great to be opening this event on such an important topic as financial inclusion. Nick and I really just wanted to start sort of outlining the importance of financial inclusion using a couple of personal sort of anecdotes and stories. And I guess from my perspective, my sort of earliest memories of what it means to experience financial inclusion was migrating to Australia as a young child in the early 90s, and having literally come into the country sort of for a week or two. I remember the CBA Dolomite program being launched at the primary school that I attended, and from that time, that very simple concept of the Dolomite program and the way that they've been able to gamify the concept of financial literacy for very young age school children. That was a very important entry point into the Australian community and also the Australian financial system as well. That very simple concept made the whole idea of money management and saving an interesting, fun, and very interesting sort of experience. And if we look at financial inclusion in terms of what it means for organizations around the world, really financial inclusion refers to the ability for financial organizations to make products and services accessible and affordable to individuals and businesses, regardless of whether their personal net worth, what the size of their personal net worth is, or what the size of the company is. And financial inclusion really strives to remove the barriers that exclude people from participating in the financial sector. And broadly, you can sort of look at financial inclusion as being defined as the penetration of basic banking services, the access to those banking services, as well as the usage and their take-up. If we look at sort of what financial inclusion means on a global scale, according to the World Bank, there's almost 2 billion adults, or around 1/3 of the global adult population, who do not have an account at a financial institution. The interesting thing is that represents, in that number, almost 60% of that number represents women, and half of that number represents the poorest 40% of households. 2/3 of unbanked adults have a primary education or less, and nearly half of the unbanked adults around the world, they come from just 7 developing countries. So what that means is that access to basic financial services, it's not only detrimental to economic and broader societal impact, but it also impacts some of the most vulnerable sectors of our global population. And therefore, it continues to amplify and extend existing lines of inequality that exist around the world. Access to financial inclusion, improving financial outcomes. There have been multiple studies that have shown that improving access to financial services improves economic growth at a national level. It improves financial system stability, and it reduces poverty as well, which has been seen in a recent 2016 study of 67 low and middle income countries over a 25-year period. And that study has shown that an increase in financial development directly influences the reduction in a number of poverty metrics. So our agenda today, and the role that technology and education can play in reducing the gap in access to financial services and improving financial inclusion. Of course, technology plays such a key role in our lives, and this is a topic where technology in particular plays a really important role. Our panelists today cover a broad range of the services across the financial spectrum, starting from identity verification and streamlining identity verification, to improving access to financial documentation, facilitating financial education and preventing fraud. All factors which improve access to credit and access to financial services across the entire spectrum of the Australian and the broader Asia Pacific community. So with that introduction, I'll hand over to my colleague, Nick Davison, for any additional comments before we hand over to our first presenter. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, Thanks, Dima, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Nick Davison. I'm a partner here at EY, focused on financial crime and financial crime consulting. So Dima's introduction is helpfully setting the scene, and I have one thing to add to that. I think the situation here in Australia and for richer countries like Australia is about not only the access to the financial system and the inclusion question, but it's also sort of increasing access and helping people make the most from the financial system. So rather than access to one product, can people get access, which would generally be a current account, getting people access to credit and insurance, which I think we all kind of acknowledge that it helps people kind of manage the ups and downs of life and absorb financial shocks and things that come along the way. So for Australia, the challenge is, I think, slightly different to some of the developing nations Dima talked about, but people have access. A lot of people here have access to one financial product, usually a current account, but increasing access to things like insurance and credit clearly have benefits for society. The other thing I was going to say quickly before we get on with the RegTech providers is a personal anecdote, and it came from when I arrived here in Australia from Singapore in May last year, and not long after I arrived, I went to the post office to get my driver's license, and I turned up with a stack of ID documents and everything kind of that I could get my hands on to prove who I was and to kick off the process to get an Australian driver's license. In front of me in the queue, there was a man that was struggling with the post office employee, and I wasn't trying to listen, but I couldn't help overhear the conversation. And it turned out he'd recently been released from prison and was trying to register with the post office to get access to government services. And all he had to help him kind of through this process was a prison release letter. And you could see that the release letter was pretty beaten up, and it didn't look the most official document. But despite the best efforts of the post office employee to kind of help him and to find him on the system and help him become, get registered and get back into society and kickstart his life, he didn't have any way of doing it. There wasn't a way that he could help that man in front of him, and he ended up giving him a call center number, and standing there behind him with all my documents and ready to go. I couldn't help feeling for the guy that being probably a pretty difficult part of his life, and hopefully looking to kickstart his life and move forward, he was being directed to an anonymous help desk, which my experience of government help desk has never been so great. So I felt for him at that moment. I thought, what are the chances that he could successfully navigate that and actually register, prove who he is, and become get into the system to help him restart his life. And then the long story short, and relative and relevant for this conversation is, I couldn't help thinking that with the government, if they had a secure digital ID and you had access to that through a biometric measure, all he would have to do was put his fingerprint down or scan his iris, or however the biometric solution worked. It'd be a far simpler way of keeping people in the system than relying on physical documentation, which that example showed to me very clearly that it wasn't the best solution for many people out there. So without further ado, I think we need to get on with it. We have a lot to get through. Abdullah from Apply ID is going to take it forward from here, and looking forward to hearing from him now. Thanks, Abdullah.
Thank you, RegTech Association and EY for inviting Apply ID to have a chat about how technology can drive financial inclusion. Next slide, please, Hong. But first, just before we kick off on that subject, a little bit more about Apply ID and what we do as an organisation. So our mission is really to create easy-to-use technology that quickly and accurately onboards customers. Our solutions range from digital application forms, biometrics, electronic ID verification, as well as affordability checks as well, all digital and all online. We were originally founded in 2018 in New Zealand by Russell and Claudia Smith, and we now operate out of Australia, New Zealand and the UK. Promoting financial inclusion globally will be our motto moving forward. Next slide, please, Hong. So I wanted to introduce everyone to Alice. She's just there on the left. Alice is the person behind that home loan application. Alice was labelled by her bank as a hard-working millennial, working at her local cafe for over 5 years and saving away to get her dream home. Alice lives in a rural town in WA. She rides her push bike to work each day. And while Alice was deemed a really great credit risk, unfortunately, word around town is that she's a bit of a hoon on the road and she lost her driver's license for speeding. So she doesn't have a driver's license and she doesn't have a passport. After being pre-approved for her home loan, she finds her dream home and it's all within her budget. Now Alice needs to verify her identity. So traditionally, finalising a home loan is a manual and slow process when it comes to the ID verification process, and it can often be difficult and costly, especially for people in rural areas, the elderly or disabled people, or you know what, people who are even just poor with their time, which is a little bit of everyone right now, to meet themselves to the minimal regulatory requirements for ID verification. Next slide, please, Hong. And that's why we've developed a verification of identity product that is 100% digital. It's completed on a mobile phone device and all done within 2 to 4 minutes. Apply ID allow the capture of many ID documents, not only just driver's license and passport, but also proof of age cards, birth, marriage and name change certificates. And we give applicants the opportunity to be able to load up to 10 additional supporting documents as part of that process in that 2 to 4 minute mobile phone process. Things that could be utility bills or land rates or anything else to help identify who they are. We also verify the individual's information where possible with trusted government sources like the DBS. And we use that biometric face matching technology coupled with state-of-the-art document tampering checks to make sure that we reduce application fraud and ensure that you as a business know who you're dealing with at that time of application. All of this is completed in a secure and compliant platform as well. Next slide, please, Hong. So I guess the business benefit that really ultimately will lead to the consumer benefit and in turn promote more financial inclusion, things like giving your customer a memorable user experience and memorable for the right reasons. I think at the beginning of this call, a few situations were mentioned where things were memorable, but maybe not for the right reasons, about changing that. And also expanding customer reach to businesses, expanding their customer offering to places where they couldn't offer loans before or wouldn't be able to offer loans before because of that face-to-face barrier. Also help meet your regulatory requirements really easily and digitally. Reduce your fraud and ID takeover, in turn reducing costs to onboard those customers, and those savings can be sent back to the customer with lower rates, as well as offering risk-based pricing when these verifications are all completed through that digital flow and process. Next slide, please, Hong. We'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us. The team would love to demo our VOI solution and see how Apply ID can help support your digital first strategy. Feel free to reach out on the details there, book a demo online, and we're also willing to offer a free trial to make sure it is something that'll help you in your organisation, which we're confident that it will. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Abdallah. That's amazingly concise and on time. I was worried about my role moderating here and trying to interrupt everybody. So well done. So next one, we're going to keep moving, and we'll have some time at the end for or through the chat for Q&A. So next one is cognitive view. Hopefully Dilip can pronounce it better than I can, but Dilip, if you want to take it away, that would be great.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you RegTech Association and EY for sponsoring this event. And it's an eye-opener for everyone to really understand this dynamics of financial inclusivity, because the definition itself is sometimes requires a lot of clarification. So So Cognitive View is a RegTech that was founded in 2019, really looking into the Royal Banking Commission challenges, and we thought we need to do something about it. And what we came up with is a communication surveillance platform that really analyzes a lot of the customer and employee communication channels to automate that compliance and conduct risk. All those typical challenges that we have seen in the Royal Banking Commission. Next slide, please. So I was looking into the figures, and this is quite astounding because 64% of Australian adults are, facing some level of financial stress and vulnerability. And post-pandemic, this has been a bigger problem. The challenge is, how do we kind of address it in a very consistent fashion? So next slide, please. So I think there is an opportunity to really use technology as a foundation, for example, data analytics, to support customers who are vulnerable, who needs a clear way to provide them access to all these different financial products, not just related to banking, but all garments of products. So in a more consistent approach. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges that we have seen in the industry is information asymmetry. So what I mean by that is companies have really developed processes and trained their people around how to sort of look into customer vulnerability issues and provide them the support. But sometimes the customers have to really ask for that support, and a lot of them, they're not aware of it, or they ask so much information to provide the qualification, to meet the qualification to get that access is quite cumbersome sometimes. So that creates a bit of a gap. And also, as companies are moving to different digital channels like chatbot, beyond contact center, Microsoft Teams, a lot of banks are now rolling out collaborative channels for customer-facing roles. That creates, and also you have different line of business, like your complaints department, customer contact center department. So they all have different understanding of what vulnerability means, which means there is always a bit of an inconsistent approach how this gets still in the first line. So, and let's think about a customer complaint. If a customer lodges a complaint and he is also vulnerable, there is a more chance that that complaint will end up with an ombudsman body like AFCA. So there is a need to create a more consistent approach across all processes and communication channels. Next slide, please. So what we have done is we looked into all the, whether you're selling a product in a retail or a wholesale model, or you need to, leverage a lot of the regulations, industry code, making sure customer vulnerability underpins all these different channels, but all the code of conduct is a key and important thing across the whole product lifecycle. So, and how do you do that is where the solution is what we have built. Next slide, please. So we have built hundreds of different integrations for voice, video, and text. So that essentially means if you have a contact center or a Microsoft team and you want to really monitor to identify a customer vulnerability issue, so you got hundreds of policies in the platform, you can pick a policy that you need and also pick the channels that you want to monitor. And that really builds that predictive capability. It identifies the customer vulnerabilities and helps your team to really do a better job. And that does it in a very consistent manner across all channels. And that predictive capability means you are just you're going beyond just compliance-driven approach or a process-driven approach, and really embedding that in your platform. So next slide, please. So this is just an example how this can be implemented. So you can select a customer vulnerability policy, whether it's a financial hardship, mental health. The technology, AI technology, can identify that from a, let's say, call center, from a chatbot, and it kind of, you create a risk-based criteria, and then it automates and provides you those kind of insights. So that essentially means your customer complaints team or a claims team or a banking team, they can do a better job in identifying those things. Next slide, please. So yeah, this essentially creates a consistent approach across all processes and communication channels. And that's very important to really improve that culture and financial inclusivity and really address that information asymmetry gap that I was highlighting and make sure that customers really get those access to the products and services. Next slide, please. So we've deployed to a number of customers, but highlighting this specific insurance company, supporting them in customer vulnerability by identifying those in the contact center, but really in the customer complaints, we could identify that in the IDR as well, that prevents the IDR complaint to end up with the ombudsman body, which is a huge cost saving because it saves them a lot of money from AFCA fees. Next slide, please. So we got a lot of awards, but been the best solution for conduct risk, RegTech 100 twice, and it keeps going, and we're really proud to be achieve this. Next slide, please. Yeah, so if you like to see a demo, or we got a few different trials available to really test the waters and look into insights and how it can actually help you. So please reach out to me, and here's my contact details. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Dilip. And I can hear my dog is trying to keep you to time in the background. So apologies if that interrupted a little bit, but I think we just about got through in time there. So thank you very much. We now have Shares and Scantek.
Thanks for that, Nick. Hi, I'm Shares Rafi, CEO and co-founder of Scantek. It's a pleasure to be able to present to everyone today. Scantek provides remote digital identity verification. And today I'm going to talk to you about how biometrics and digital ID can support those without formal ID documents, but as well as provide a benefit to your customers more broadly. So digital verification of identity implemented correctly is a tool for greater financial inclusion. It provides improved service delivery for those living in remote areas affected by age, mobility, or living with a disability. And thanks for that, Tom. And even assisting access to services when escaping natural disasters or from domestic or financial abuse. On top of that, it allows businesses to provide a cheaper, faster, and more secure service offering. Next slide. By using RegTech, financial inclusion doesn't have to be seen as just a public good or a service cost of business, but rather can be used for broader demographic reach. Technology can allow businesses to check against a wide variety of documents such as birth certificates, Medicare cards, or electoral rolls, even if the physical document's not present. And combining this with biometrics and liveness checks, you can minimize fraud risks. For many of the more marginal members of our community, the cost to simply travel to physical locations is significant. And also in many cases, the mobility can make it difficult to attend the physical location. By empowering your customers to be able to interact from their homes, provides both greater convenience to those customers, but also potentially financial benefit to them as well. Next slide, please. So our technology allows a customer to send a text message and use a mobile device to automatically capture a photo of their ID documents, or if they don't have them, to manually input them. We validate these details entered, ensure they're correct, and we also capture facial biometrics and liveness to confirm that they're there and present at the time. Critically, our process flow is visually clear and really guides the user through the step, which can be important for people that have accessibility issues. It also allows you to design a flow that can allow you to ask for customers from your preferred document collection, so your more common ID types such as driver's licenses and passports, but also to less standard documentation, including utility bills, pay slips, or other government documents, which can be really critical, especially for those that have less access to standard formal ID documents. Once a customers complete this process, we then conduct further checks to verify the information is complete, and also conduct other know your customer due diligence or other business requirements that you might have for verifying credit history, etc. The entire process generally is done in a few minutes, and really critically, once you have a customer enrolled, you can use their facial biometrics at later dates to verify them without needing to go back to those identity documents or other information such as passwords. What this means in the real world is that customers are able to use our technology to onboard people in the furthest parts of Australia. This can be mine sites, stations, or even remote communities. It's meant during COVID that businesses and customers were able to safely continue on board regardless of whatever restrictions were in place. And we even had customers internationally who needed to have their identity traditionally verified at Australian embassies or consulates that simply weren't able to do it. And then we're able to use our technology to successfully verify their identity all across the world. One of the facts I'm most proud about is that our technology is so simple and easy to use that we regularly have significant amounts of less technically native people such as pensioners, regularly complete verification using our technology. And just last week, we had an 87-year-old retiree who contacted us to tell us she'd just used our technology and found it very simple and easy to use. So I thought was brilliant. It's the real world feedback that lets our team know that what we're doing is important and beneficial. And personally, for me, I like the fact of being able to put financial control back in the hands of customers, which can assist in reducing things like elderly financial abuse or coercion. Next slide, please. I think there's 4 key times when the value of instant digital identity verification is maximised. And that's providing inclusive services that benefit your entire client base, but especially the more marginalised members of society, such as mentioned, people living in remote areas with disabilities or elderly. It's correctly provided digital ID and biometrics can also allow your customers to more quickly access your services. The longer you keep customers waiting, the greater the frustration and potential for them to opt out and go elsewhere. Our technology allows you to make rapid decisions for efficient onboarding. There's significant cost in businesses to provide frontline personnel, and for many members of society, as I've stated, having to go to a physical location can be both difficult and can incur substantial costs. And using the correct RegTech, you can significantly reduce the cost on all sides. And a secure onboarding process protects your customers against fraud and identity theft. Scantek balances speed and security and earns customer loyalty and safeguards your reputation. Next slide, please. RegTech, to me, provides an unparalleled opportunity to deliver greater financial inclusion. The benefits can be found across your whole business, from onboarding, cost savings, increased compliance and auditability, as well as enhanced data security and sovereignty. At the end of the day, the end result of all this is an enhanced customer experience and also a reduced risk of reputational, financial and legal risks. That's me today. I appreciate your time. I'd love to answer any questions at the end of the session, or please reach out to me if you'd like to discuss anything. Thank you.
Thanks, Shaz. I love the story about the 87-year-old. I hope I'm kind of adapting to new technology when I hope I get to 87, and I hope I'm still adapting to new technology then. So Lisa from Verifier, you're up next.
Great. Thanks, Nick, and thanks to the RegTech Association and to EY as well for sponsoring this. So I'm the founder and CEO of Verifier, and I'm presenting MoneyPulse to you today. Verifier is a consent-driven data sharing business. So our job, as well as being a RegTech, is to give people access to their data in order to get better outcomes. And as you will see, in doing that, we can also provide better outcomes and better compliance for their providers. Next slide, please, Hong. I might put my hand up like this when I want to switch. We believe that financial inclusion is powered by better conversations. And I guess we're talking to the other side of it. When you get a financial product, the game's not over. We actually now have to talk about your financial well-being in the use of that product. So, and that, I guess, as a RegTech, what we're about is looking at financial inclusion through the lens of human-centric but digital first, because that is the world we're moving into, which is why I love that story about the grandma. But we also have to bear in mind that financial inclusion and good outcomes from the use of financial products is powered by humans, and they're not exactly rational. And just like anything that's behaviourally changing, people can put their heads in the sand, they can get pretty overwhelmed. We have to remember there's emotion there. Next slide, please, Hong. So we need to start with conversations. We have to bring people into the conversation about their money. And that's what Money Pulse does. And so we work in collaboration with the Melbourne Institute from the University of Melbourne. And we in fact won an Innovation Connection grant for this work and this product, as well as winning, which was amazing, the Social Impact RegTech of the Year late last year for it. So Money Pulse is really simple. It powers conversations by enabling people to self-assess very, very quickly their financial well-being with just a few questions that have been academically peer-reviewed. So you get a score out of 100. And then we offer them the ability to reality check that against their banking data. You can plug in whichever geography the banking APIs, but in Australia, we use the consumer data right, which we're proud to be one of the first data recipients. And people, funnily enough, end up in a few different places. Roughly a third tend to be in the unhappy and we know it spectrum. Then there's a third who tend to be, I'm good at money and I know it. And then there's a really interesting third who are pretty confused. But interestingly, each group with resources triaged to where they are actually at can benefit. Next slide, please. Thanks. The journey really does at the moment start with an invitation. At the moment, the way we're live in market is providers, especially lenders, are sending out invitations to their customers to participate in Money Pulse. People are then filling it out. And the interesting thing is, as they get instant feedback, they're also supporting portfolio level insights. Next slide, please. The actual survey is less than 5 minutes to complete. Really simple questions, and they are in multiple languages. But the nice bit about it is even just the self-assessment is so powerful, because you find out, let's say I'm just getting by, I'm getting 57 out of 100. So I get resources tuned to that. But interestingly, if I do, this is a private survey, so I don't have to talk to my provider, but if I do, I have a language for that. Next slide, please. Then people get the opportunity to reality check. And as I said, in Australia, they do that with the consumer data right. Fully privacy by design. Next slide. Okay, so the output from the person's point of view is instant input financial literacy in a digital human-centric form. Next slide, please. But I guess, as I said, the kicker here is that we are giving people their data to get better outcomes. That's on the left. But we also are able, because they pay it forward, and we have dynamic portfolio sort of dashboards that lenders or other service providers who are subject to design and distribution obligations can use to monitor product and distribution customer monitoring of their well-being. And that enables people to track difficulty and emerging issues and emerging improvements. So they make sure they're selling the right product to the right person. The other advantage is, because this is a standardized metric and it's academically validated, we're able to support benchmarking and also policy work. And we've already done work in this space around responsible lending using this tool. Next slide, please. So as I said, pretty exciting about who's participating and what tools we're using. Next slide. I won't go into this except to say that there is a heap of research, including Verify's work, that backs this up. But the proof is in the pudding. Next slide, please. And that genuinely is that, how to give people their data to give better outcomes to them and their providers. If you want to know more, please let us know. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Louise. And so far, everybody's done a fantastic job of keeping to time. Now we have our final RegTech coming up. So Alexander, from your financial wellness, you take it away and live up to the good timekeeping of your fellow contributors here.
Thanks, Nick. I'll do my best. And thanks both to EY and the RegTech Association for running the event today. So I'm Alex Hassel, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Your Financial Wellness. Our vision is to improve the financial wellness of Australians. Now, obviously, to improve something, you need to be able to measure it. Next slide. That's why last year we partnered with the Centre for Social Impact at the University of New South Wales to validate the Your Financial Wellness Index. The index brings together unique attitudinal and psychographic data to paint a picture of a person's financial wellness. Not only did the project validate the index, but it also established that there's a very strong correlation between financial literacy and financial wellness outcomes. However, despite best efforts over a number of years, a lack of financial literacy persists in Australia. Next slide. Our research showed that 1/3 of Australians could not answer 3 basic financial literacy questions correctly. We also saw that levels of financial stress remain high, with only 20% of respondents saying they were fully financially satisfied. We also found a really concerning discrepancy between the financial wellness of men and women. So, there's a persistent and statistically significant difference between the level of financial wellness of men and women, and we'll be investigating that going forward. So these findings are somewhat reinforced by a lot of the presentations we've heard today, but also by a recently released report by the OECD. It came out a couple of months ago, and what it said was that while levels of financial inclusion are relatively high compared to the rest of the world, many Australians still lack sufficient financial knowledge and capability. So one of the key recommendations of the OECD report is that financial institutions, as part of their broader ESG commitments, should make available financial capability resources that equip people with sufficient financial knowledge to fully participate in the economy. So what they're really saying is that in the Australian context, financial literacy is key to greater financial inclusion. Next slide. We obviously welcome this recommendation, as it's a core belief of ours that financial literacy and financial wellness should be the responsibility of caring financial institutions. So the solution that we've created is an online platform made available to users via their financial institution. And in essence, it's a knowledge hub where someone can explore all things financial. It includes learning modules, strategy guides, interactive webinars, video, as well as budgeting software. Now, all of that's fantastic, but simply providing access to information and resources is not really enough in today's world. Next slide, please. So where we differentiate is through hyper-personalisation. We enable a person to input information about their financial goals and aspirations, as well as their attitude to finances. This data is then fed into our proprietary algorithm, which provides the user with customised reports and takes them on a personalised learning journey, which has been designed based on the principles of behavioural economics and nudge theory. The data set also delivers financial institutions some really powerful insights into their customers, meaning that the organisation can position itself as more than simply a product provider. They're seen as a trusted advisor by helping a consumer to achieve their financial goals and aspirations, and importantly, improve their customers' financial wellness. And I think to the point that was made by Verifier earlier, when it comes to the consumer data right, the sort of natural conclusion of that could be that with easy access and portability of someone easily able to change providers, that it's simply a race to the cheapest provider. Whereas if a provider can partner with someone to help them through their financial journey, it might be a better way to increase that customer relationship. Next slide, please. So this approach has delivered proven results by way of improved financial wellness for consumers, so as measured by the Your Financial Wellness Index, as well as an increased share of wallet for the partner financial institutions. You can see on this slide that users of the YFW platform have significantly higher growth in both loans and deposits. So what this suggests is that a financially well consumer is more engaged with their financial institution. We also see that financially literate users are better placed to seek out professional advice and, importantly, both understand and value that advice. Next slide. So looking at conclusions, there's a persistent lack of financial literacy in Australia, and we've proven a direct relationship between financial literacy and financial inclusion and wellness. We see that there's a role for caring financial institutions when it comes to bridging this gap. And we think that RegTech, including what we offer, but also what the other presenters have shown today, is going to be instrumental really in helping financial institutions to improve financial wellness and drive financial inclusion. Now, you can download a full copy of our Insights report by visiting our website, www.yourfinancialwellness.com.au. Thanks very much, and I hope I kept to time.
Nick's put his big stick away. It's up to me, I think. Thanks very much, Alex. That was really awesome. You know, what I love about my job, if I'm allowed to say that, is that I represent a group of people who I think could be best described as, you know, people who are looking after people. And at the beginning of this presentation, I talked about, you know, we start each of these presentations by talking about people. And it occurred to me that these are the people looking after people. Thanks very much for all of your insightful presentations. I mean, there's some things that I learned out of that, because often we are talking about financial inclusion in the context of poorer nations. But of course, even in Australia, when I learned that, I think from Dillip, 64% of Australians are under some form of financial stress. And then I think Alex said 32% of Australians lack some financial literacy. And then all of those things, which I hadn't really been thinking about, like age, mobility, disability, elderly, financial and domestic abuse. And Lisa raised a very good and important point as well. The right product for the right person will aid, you know, the right kind of financial inclusion. So I just thought I'd ask Nick or Dima if they wanted to say any final things before I round out the conversation today. We've still got some time, so if you want to put some questions into the chat, please feel free to do so, and I'd encourage the presenters to answer those questions, and also encourage the presenters, please pop a link in there to the case studies that you might have on your website. Because often people like to go and look at those to see who you're working with and the breadth and depth of your solutions. And indeed, for those international people on the line today, have you done any of your work, you know, other markets offshore will be highly interesting. So Dima or Nick, did you want to say anything to wrap up before I call a formal conclusion to proceedings?
I think we're happy to throw to questions, Deb. I think there's a couple of interesting presentations, and it'll be great to see if there's any other questions from the audience.
Okay, so was there anybody on the thread there that did not get their question answered that would like to turn on their camera and mic and ask that question, and perhaps we can corral a group response to that? Michael, I think Michael Joyce is making a statement there rather than asking a question. Is that right? Yeah, doesn't have a question mark, so I'll assume. Oh, there you go. Thanks, Lisa. Was there anybody else that didn't get their question answered? I know somebody put, I think it was Brian Tang put something on there about Indigenous financial wellness, and this is something that we are like super, you know, super aware of, and so that's why we chose last year that instead of giving awards like hard copy trophies to our award winners, we made a donation for each of the award winners to the to the First Nations Foundation, which is a financial inclusion and literacy foundation, and their sole purpose and work is to work with Indigenous communities to help them with their inclusion, and probably will work towards reducing some of this financial stress and improve that metric on financial literacy. Was there any other questions? Sorry, I'm just looking down. It's a good point raised by Mark Staples, actually, because I saw that he asked a couple of questions on there, and so as probably somebody that works for Data 61, he sees the good and the bad, and there's good and bad in people. So is there anything worth probing around, Mark, there around some of the solutions that you've seen today and the what ifs? So can you steal somebody's biometric identity?
Yeah, I mean, you can take a picture of someone's face and then you can take the picture and shove it in front of the camera, but that's not going to, both the presenters mentioned they have liveness checks, which can help to prevent that being an attack. But I think it's, but then the attackers just make deep fakes that look a bit more sophisticated. So it's as they said, it's like a arms race. But the challenge is, I guess, if someone has stolen your stuff, your sort of face or other biometric information and is using it, it's not like you can change your face. You can't change your genetic code or your iris or whatever's being used to identify you. So you need some other way of recovering from that situation. So I think I totally agree. These kind of mechanisms can help with identity verification for financial inclusion, but it's interesting. There's lots of other trade-offs and complications as well. I don't have a solution, sorry, but I was just curious to know.
No, that's okay, but that's okay. But you're sitting in the right organisation to help. I've got no doubt. There's a couple of other things on here. Julian has shared some recent research into Money 101 that you might wish to download. And also there was a question that Jovan Ang put on the chat a bit earlier, and I don't know that anybody has answered it. I don't know whether anybody has any further answers or a central library. Jovan, we've certainly started creating a central library for the association right now. It may not answer that specific problem, but there is an info hub on our website to go and have a look at all different kinds of information and reports, and we're going to be building that out over time. Was there any anything else? Because otherwise, what we can do, we had a tradition during the pandemic of inviting people to turn their cameras on and their mics on and come in and say hello. So for those of you that need to go, we will call a formal conclusion to the event. And for those of you that would like to stay online, please do, and we can have a chat until 5:30. If that suits you. So I'm waiting for the first friendly face that I see.